And for those that don't know, Qantas is the oldest continuous operating airline in the world. And it was founded by 3 entrepreneurs, when most airlines in the 1920s were founded by governments. And it was founded by 2 World War heroes, World War aces, that came back and thought there was an opportunity for air travel to overcome, as they said, the tyranny of distance, which is a big issue for Australia. But they decided not to do the easy thing and set an airline up in Sydney or Melbourne. They set it up in Longreach, which is outback Australia in the middle of a desert. And they decided that they would build their own aircraft initially and fly freight and passengers on a rickety aircraft that had 2 passengers and 1 pilot. And they started that business in the 1920s. Every decade, they reinvented the business. In the 1930s, they decided after the Wall Street crash that they needed to change the model. And they went to British Imperial Airways, the biggest airline in the world, and decided, have we got an idea with you, we'll form a partnership. And we'll fly from Sydney to Singapore, and you fly people the rest of the way. And in 1935, we started the Kangaroo route. It was called the Kangaroo route because there were so many hops on the way to London. Actually, it took you 9 days to get from Sydney to Southampton on 12 stops along the way. And that's how Qantas got into international services. In the 1940s, when the Japanese invaded Southeast Asia, and Australia found it difficult to link up to the UK, Qantas came up with an amazing operation from Perth to Sri Lanka, and then connected with British Airways the rest of the way to carry 2 or 3 passengers on each flight, and to carry microfiche and material that kept the government in contact. Those flights were an average of 30 hours in the air. They were called the secret order of the double sunrise because you were on the flights for so long you saw 2 sunrises. Still to this day, they are the longest flights that have ever taken place in commercial aviation, and they will never be beaten. In the 1950s, we were the first airline outside the United States to take a jet, a 707, and fly across the Pacific, and the 3rd airline to fly across the Atlantic. In the 1960s, we were the 2nd airline after Pan Am to fly around the world in each direction. In the 1970s, Qantas, for all those that can afford to travel it, was the airline that created business class. You have us to thank for that. An amazing operation. We have the record for the maximum amount of passengers ever on a commercial flight. When Cyclone Tracy hit Darwin and we needed to get people out, we put 672 people on a 747 and did it safely to get them to Sydney. No A380 or 747 has ever carried that amount of people since. In the 1990s, we formed the One World Alliance, and in the 2000s, we were the first airline to successfully set up a low-cost carrier. And that takes you to my time when I took over Qantas. And while this was an amazing brand, an amazing operation, when I took over Qantas, it had a lot of problems. It had a product that was tired, a union group that was out of control and running the airline. It had profitability that was dramatically impacted by the global financial crisis. We lost $1 billion overnight when that occurred. And we needed dramatic change. And the next few years had a number of issues that affected us dramatically. We stood up to the unions and had to ground the airline after locking out the staff in 2011 to actually get control of the business back from the unions. It was probably the biggest industrial relations dispute in Australian history. We won that dispute. It impacted a lot of passengers because we were grounded for 2 days. And I remember a story, we paid compensation to everybody impacted. and did whatever we could to help. But I remember a story of these backpackers that were caught in Singapore, and we couldn't get them back to London. And he did a video and he posted on YouTube. And they were put up as part of our compensation in a 5-star hotel. And they were having their cocktails at the swimming pool. And he did a video saying, "Qantas, stay grounded, we're enjoying this too much." But we did change the company after that, and in 2013 we did the biggest restructure in our history, which unfortunately meant we had to lay off 5,000 people. We had to remove $2 billion in costs. We had to change the product and services that we were offering. And that's probably one of the toughest things that any leader and people here in business know. It's never easy when you have to restructure it. And I always remember one of the moments, that was probably my low point. It was a funny moment and in some ways a sad moment. Because again, I was on breakfast TV. I should avoid breakfast TV. And we had all of the TV stations, and we were doing it in a park that overlooked the Harbour Bridge in Sydney. And we were explaining to each of them in turn, ABC, Channel 7, Channel 9, Channel 10, what we were doing and why we were doing it. And it was in the papers in those few days about what was occurring. And I did a first interview, which went okay. And I got to the second interview. And as I was doing the second interview, this guy walking through the park sees me. And he's very irate because of the changes we were making. And he says, Joyce, you be. Can I say bastard here? I probably can. And he was very annoyed, but he was walking two dogs, Jack Russells. And as a paper boy in Dublin, I used to hate Jack Russells. They always bit your legs when you deliver papers. Irish Wolfhounds were fine, German Shepherds were fine, but Jack Russells were terrible. And he let these dogs go, and our security went to him to make sure he didn't do anything nasty. And as I was listening to the interviewer down in earpiece, who said, "We did a survey today, and 95% of people think you should resign." At the same time he was saying that, the dogs went straight to my ankles, were biting my ankles, and I had to give this interview down the line. And I did say to that interviewer, well, it doesn't matter what the public thinks, I'm doing a job. And the job is to turn Qantas around and do what's right for the business and make sure I protect as many jobs as we can and make sure that we can grow the business. And as Mary Rose said, the company did the most dramatic turnaround in Australian corporate history. It went from a share price of $1 to now over $6. A market cap of $2 billion to $10 billion. A profitability of 2.8 billion loss to a profitability it reached 1.6 billion. It's been now well over $1 billion for 5 years in a row. So the company is growing again, and we recruited 3,000 people in the last few years, growing our businesses massively. And the future, coming into 100 years, is looking bright. In fact, in last year, we did one of the big highlights of my career when we flew an aircraft from Perth to London non-stop. The first time Australia and Europe were connected directly with a direct service. Believe it or not, the only two